Good evening. I want to welcome everybody here tonight to the Mount Lebanon Public Library. My name is Rob Goodman. I am the director of South Hills Jewish Pittsburgh at the South Hills JCC. We are the Community Engagement Division at the South Hills JCC. We are so thrilled you're here tonight with our partners, the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, as well as our friends at the Mount Lebanon Public Library. I want to thank Brandon and Sharon, who are sitting in the back, for their ongoing hospitality. This is a great facility, and we love bringing programs here. And as a South Hills resident, I love showing our friends in the city what a wonderful job, what wonderful people we have here in the burbs. And this turnout tonight is absolutely fantastic, and we are so thrilled you're here. Give yourselves a round of applause for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to introduce my friend and colleague, Christina, from the Holocaust Center, who's has a few housekeeping announcements and some other things to talk about.
Yes, thank you. Again, I echo what Rob said. Thank you all for being here tonight. This is an amazing turnout. My name is Christina Sahofi. I work at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. If you feel so inclined to cross a couple rivers sometime, please come visit us in the Greenfield neighborhood of Pittsburgh. We have some flyers out on the table with some upcoming events of ours as well. Two housekeeping notes. One, please take a moment to silence your cell phones if you haven't already done so. And second, when we pull up Debbie's parents on Skype later on in the program, if you do ask them a question, please speak up. Stand up and speak up. They are a little hard of hearing, so please elevate your tone, if you will. And with that, I'm going to turn it over for the formal introduction to Dan Shaner, a good friend of the Holocaust Center and a South Hills resident?
Yeah.
An educator.
Hi, I'm Dan.
Hi, Dan.
I'm not part of the Holocaust Center. I'm a local teacher, but I'm smart enough to take advantage of all the Holocaust Center has to offer. If you're a teacher and you don't, start. It makes your job an awful lot easier. Tonight, the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh is excited to be back in the South Hills with our Generation Speaker Series in a new venue for us, the Mount Lebanon Public Library. For sponsorship of our Generation Speaker Series, we thank the Sylvia and Martin Snow Family Fund, RAD, the Allegheny Regional Watershed District, the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, and for tonight, Rob Goodman, who, back in the corner, and the South Hills Jewish Pittsburgh. We also thank the staff of the Mount Lebanon Public Library and the Holocaust Center. The Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh connects the horrors of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism with injustices of today. Through education, the Holocaust Center seeks to address these injustices and empower individuals to build a more civil and humane society. The Generation Speaker Series carries on the legacy of Holocaust survivors by featuring children and grandchildren of survivors telling their family stories. Tonight's program is a very special one because we have Deborah Stueber here and her parents joining us by video chat. Deborah Leuchter Stueber was born and raised on Long Island and majored in elementary education at the State University of Oneonta in New York. She moved to Pittsburgh in 1991 and now calls this her hometown. Shortly after she moved to Pittsburgh, she met the former Holocaust Center Director Linda Hurwitz and has been a volunteer at the center on and off for over the past 20 years. Debbie has one sister in Brooklyn, New York, and her parents live in Boynton Beach, Florida. She's married and has 3 grown sons. Debbie's an inside sales and senior customer service representative for a local electronics manufacturer. Telling her parents' story is one of her passions in life, the other being craft beer. If you get her started, she could talk about that for hours as well. Without further ado, please welcome Debbie Stueber to the stage.
Thank you. I might stand, I might sit. I haven't decided yet. Thank you so very much for coming this evening. I'd also like to thank the Holocaust Center and specifically Jackie and Christina who are here this evening and Lauren Bansfather who couldn't make it as she's at another event in Geneva, Switzerland. I'd also like to thank my family and friends for their support, especially in the last few weeks. I just wanted to mention that here on the table are some links and resources to things that I might mention this evening that you would not be familiar with. Hopefully by the end of the evening, you'll get to know my parents a little better. As long as Skype works, you'll get to talk to them. And actually, my father is extremely hard of hearing, but Mom, she's got supersonic hearing. As we approach International Holocaust Remembrance Day and the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz on Monday, January 27th, the voices and the eyewitnesses of the Holocaust are quickly dwindling. And it's my generation and yours to carry their torch. The Anti-Defamation League in 2018 said there were 1,859 anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. Not one day goes by that I don't hear about another one, either here or abroad. In November of 2018, excuse me, shortly after the Tree of Life massacre here in Pittsburgh, my sister Julie spoke at a vigil in Brooklyn, New York. And in part of her speech, she mentioned that when Julie and I were little, my father would always say, you know, the Holocaust could happen again. And you better have your passports ready to go to Israel. I personally don't think that the Holocaust could ever happen again, but with the climate in the world today, I'm sure we're all extremely concerned. My mom, Edith Leuchter, was born in Bruchsal, Germany on December 31st, 1927. Her father owned Max Loeb's grocery store, which was named after him. And he sold canned goods and produce, butcher supplies and tools. And they lived above the grocery store. In July of 1938, after Max saw the handwriting on the wall, he emigrated to the United States. The plan was to send for everybody else, but unfortunately, that never happened. When he got to New York, he sent this telegram to his wife and children. And you can see the telegram has the swastika emblem on there. On Kristallnacht, otherwise known as the Night of Broken Glass, it was November 9th or 10th, 1938, and Edith awakened in the wee hours of the morning. She could hear sirens and breaking glass and could even see flames outside of her window, at which point she crawled into bed with her mother, Yulia, to seek comfort. At this point, Yulia said it was unsafe to stay, so they moved to Edith's grandmother's house, Matilda Weil, about 10 minutes away. Shortly thereafter, Heinz, this is Heinz right here, was sent to a school in Frankfurt. You see, one of Edith's aunts said there wasn't enough food in the home in Bruchsal, as there were already shortages. And he was sent to this school in Frankfurt, and Edith is bitter about this to this day because she feels that if Heinz wasn't sent away, things could have turned out differently. From that school, he was moved to an orphanage in Frankfurt as well. Eventually, he was deported, to Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. See, this was the model camp that Hitler was showing the Red Cross to show how great he was treating all the prisoners, which obviously wasn't true. In May of 1944, he was deported to Auschwitz, the infamous concentration camp in Poland. You see, he was moved to a specific area called the Deborahs Family camp. 17,517 people were deported from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz. Heinz was one of 2,499 people. You see, as the Allies were beginning to learn about the Holocaust, this camp was created to mislead the world about the final solution. Heinz was given a prisoner number between A1445 and A2506. Of the 17,517 people who were deported from Theresienstadt, only 261 survived. Heinz was not one of them. He either died of starvation or disease or was killed in the gas chambers. On October 22nd, 1940, about 29,000 Jews were deported from Bruchsal and surrounding areas in Germany. Edith, her mother Julia, her grandmother Matilda were given 1 hour to get their things ready to move to the railroad station in the town. Obviously, they could only bring a few suitcases. When they got to the railroad station, Julia asked for permission to call her son Heinz, who was in Frankfurt, to see if he could join them. She was denied this request. But she was given approval to go home to look for the papers that she said she had to emigrate to the United States. She went back twice, but for whatever reason, the papers were not there. Inside the railroad station, they could see outside the windows. And there were boys and girls from the town who were yelling that they were happy to see the Jews leave Bruchsal, and they were spitting on them. Eventually, they boarded the train, and they breathed a small sigh of relief because they crossed the Rhine, which meant that they were going south as opposed to east to Poland. Eventually, they got to southwestern France, where they were put in an internment camp called Gurs, G-U-R-S. There were wooden barracks and straw that Edith had to use to make mattresses, and there were too few blankets for too many people. Edith describes that it was extremely disgusting and very muddy. She went to school there, but she learned very little. In April of 1941, her mother and her grandmother were deported to another camp called Rive-Salt in the area of Perpignan, France, still in the south of France. By this point, Julia had a hernia and was pretty ill. At this camp, the barracks were infested with insects, and according to my mom, the beds looked like cages for rabbits. One bright spot was that Max, Edith's father, was able to send packages and money from the United States. Edith was always hungry. She says the food consisted of watery soup with roots and vegetables that looked like weeds. Julia was able to save the bread that they were rationed in the morning for the evening to give to Julia when she got back from school. And Julia also had rosy cheeks, so the other prisoners were actually jealous because they thought that they were getting more food. The Vichy government of France gave the difficult choice to the parents in the camp to sign their children over to an organization called OSE, which translates to Children's Aid Society. See, this was a Jewish underground organization that operated throughout the war and saved over 5,000 children. Edith had to say goodbye to her mother and her grandmother, Matilda, but she couldn't hug Matilda because at this point Matilda had body lice. A few months later, Edith got a telegram from her mother that she was deported to Drancy, another internment camp in Paris, and eventually deported to Auschwitz. Edith hopes that she didn't make it to Auschwitz and died of the hernia in the cattle car on the long trip there. She also found out that her grandmother Matilda died in a hospital in Perpignan and luckily did not get deported. By the end of the war, Edith was in 5 schools and orphanages. In one of them, she was also a part-time nanny for a family in the area of Alsace-Lorraine, which is the geographic area between France and Germany. And it made sense because my mother was from Germany, but she was learning French. And she was given the name Edith Labelle. My mother was also in an orphanage called Majelier, and she was there for about 1.5 years. She made a lot of friends there. And she also met a boy named Kurt. And he really liked her, but she thought he was a big shot and didn't pay him much attention. Towards the end of the war, she became a French Girl Scout. And upon liberation, was able to get an affidavit from her father, Max, and emigrated to the United States and reached the port of New York on April 23rd, 1946. This is an ad that Max placed in a German Jewish newspaper called Aufbau, searching for his wife and son. my uncle, and my grandmother, Heinz and Julia. My father, Kurt Leuchter, was born in Vienna, Austria, on February 6, 1929. His father, Moritz, owned a wholesale silk business called Leuchter and Granig. My father was an only child. He had many friends. They went on vacations and had a pretty good life. But on March 12, 1938, all that changed, as that's when Germany annexed Austria, otherwise known as the Anschluss. And at this point, the borders were all closed. Excuse me. On Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, Kurt was sent home early from school at about 9:30 in the morning. And on his way home from school, he saw a synagogue burning. And the SS were shooting and dragging the men out of the synagogue, forcing them to throw the Torahs or the Jewish Bibles into the Danube River. He hurried home. When he got to his apartment building, he saw that the SS were arresting his father and 9 other Jewish men. He begged them to tell him where they were taking him, but they just yelled at him to go upstairs. So Kurt sat on the steps and waited for his mother Rosa to return from her shopping trip. She knew it was too unsafe to stay, so they walked 3 blocks to Kurt's grandmother's house. On their walk, 2 SS approached them. One grabbed Kurt by the hair, the other grabbed Rosa by the hair and threw them down on the street. A passerby tried to help them, but the SS threatened her with being sent to Dachau concentration camp. When they got to Kurt's grandmother's house, Kurt's Aunt Paula and a cousin were there as well. And 10 days later, there was a knock at the door. They were afraid to open it because they thought it was the SS. But Aunt Paula looked through the peephole and saw somebody looking really dirty and disheveled and thought it was probably safe to open the door. So they did, and upon opening it, to their surprise, it was Moritz. Oops. My grandfather. You see, for the last 10 days, he was held in an armory, and the SS treated him badly and threatened to cut off his finger if he couldn't take off his wedding ring, which luckily he was able to do so. But he and another man were told by the Nazis that they had 3 months to get their families out of Austria. And Moritz was able to procure a visa via Genoa, Italy, and in February 1939, by way of Cologne, Germany, and Brussels, they ended up in Antwerp, Belgium, with very few suitcases and a bit of jewelry. Here, Kurt learned how to speak Flemish and French, and things were quiet for a while. They ended up living very nearby, or next to, I'm not sure, a neighbor who happened to be from the town of Brody, Poland, which happens to be Moritz's hometown. You see, Moritz was born in Brody, Poland, but moved to Vienna when he was a little boy. On May 10th, 1940, everything was upended again. And at 6 a.m. in the morning, the Germans invaded Belgium. All the Jewish men were arrested, and Moritz was deported by the Belgians to the south of France. In July of 1940, Rosa and Kurt were moved to a detention camp called Limburg, in Limburg, Belgium, excuse me. Paula and the cousin were still in Antwerp. Well, you see, Paula didn't look Jewish because she had blonde hair and blue eyes. So she approached the Gestapo to get papers for them to move to Paris, France. So they lived in Paris, France for 2 months. But they wanted to be near Moritz. So they hired a guide to take them across the demarcation line. It was very dangerous, They did it at night. There were 14 other Jews, and the SS were guarding the border with guard dogs and machine guns. Luckily, they crossed the border. And at this point, they boarded a train for Marseille in the south of France. Aunt Paula and a cousin got off in Toulouse. Kurt and Edith, as I said, were supposed to go to Marseille, but accidentally they got off on the train stop one before, which was extremely dangerous because you see Kurt and Rosa had no ID papers. But somehow, at 11 years old, Kurt had the wherewithal to push his mother through the train station. And at this point, they registered with the Jewish agency and were put in a detention camp called Hotel Terminus. By this point, Moritz was in 3 different camps: Saint-Cyprien, Gers, which I had mentioned earlier in my mother's story, but they were in different sections, and now a camp called Camp Playmill. And my father was able to bring food to him on the weekends. At one point, Rosa and Kurt ended up in the same camp. But they also were able to get a pass to go to the town of Marseille, and my father had his bar mitzvah there at a synagogue. Soon after that, in August of 1942, Moritz and Rosa were given that same difficult choice to turn their son over to OSE. And on August 9th, 1942, they signed the papers. This is the last letter that Rosa and Moritz, my grandparents, wrote to Kurt. Basically, they were looking for him to procure food for them. And they end with, "Take care of everything and please make us proud." Months later, Kurt found out that Rosa and Moritz were both killed in the gas chambers in Auschwitz. At this point, Kurt's in a place called Hotel Bompard, which was repurposed as a detention camp. The conditions weren't good there either, obviously. So he and some friends decided to escape one night when the French police were drunk. So they left, they got caught, brought back to Bompard, and tried the second time. But this time they were smarter and they were undetected. And somehow they knew that there was a home sponsored by OSE called Majolier. You see there, my father was able to procure food from nearby farmers, and on a bicycle with a wagon brought it back. Here's where he met a young girl named Edith, who he liked, but I mentioned before she was not a fan of him. They were told they could go to the port of Marseille and board a ship for the United States. But at that point, the US had reached Africa, and the German U-boats were bombing the armed forces. So he was put back to Majolier for a brief period of time. In February of 1943, Kurt was moved to a boys' delinquent home in a town called Jolet-Bois. The director of the home, her name was Mademoiselle Burel, and she knew he was Jewish, and she had a connection to the mayor of that town. And they provided false papers to Kurt. His new name was now Claude Lambert, and he too was supposed to be from Alsace-Lorraine because he was from Austria, so he spoke German and he also was learning French. Here, he cooked and chopped wood and performed various other chores. Months later, somebody squealed that there was a Jewish boy hiding in the home. So the Nazis came looking for Kurt. He was hiding in an armoire for several hours, and luckily the Nazis didn't open the closet. But at this point, Mademoiselle Burel, the director, knew he could no longer stay there. And she made a connection for him to the Maquis, the French underground. And for the next year, Kurt lived in the woods and helped to blow up the last truck of German convoys and the rails that they passed. This was with this was with British and American assistance. Upon liberation, he was sent to 2 more orphanages in Lyon, France, and in Paris. But at one point, he went back to the neighbor. I think I left a little bit of a story out. So when they were in Antwerp and there was a neighbor from the same town as my grandfather, he gave them, he said that they could hide some jewelry in a washcloth in his basement wall. Well, my father was actually eavesdropping on his parents' conversation in Antwerp. So after the war, he was able to go back to Antwerp and retrieve his father's gold pocket watch and his mother's bracelet and wedding ring. In Paris, he got a job making leather handbags, and in the evening attended technical school. His uncle was already living in the United States and was able to get a visa for him. And in August of 1946, he boarded a troop ship called the Athos and with 67 other orphans, arrived in the port of New York on September 8th, 1946. That's Edith. In January of 1947, my father was standing outside the Museum of Modern Art on the sidewalk just talking to his friends. And who should tap him on the shoulder but Edith, the girl he liked in Majolier, the orphanage. They embraced, and Edith must have seen something different in Kurt this time because they fell in love. And on August 13th, 1950, they were married, which coincidentally is my oldest son's birthday. So he was born on our 40th anniversary. In January of 1952, my father was drafted into the U.S. Army and spent 9 months in Korea on the 38th parallel. Luckily, he made it home safe. He worked for Columbia Broadcasting System and did TV repairs for a short while. And eventually, he became an aerospace engineer without a college degree. You see, my father worked on the guidance navigation system of a couple of different Apollos. And his name, along with several other 100 engineers, is still on microfiche on the moon. This is my dad's signature. And I have this plaque in my home. So does my dad, so does my sister. In 2011, my father was given the Legion of Honor Award and Medal by the French government of France. There was also a letter, and when I read it, something didn't jive. Well, I knew my father was a Holocaust survivor, I knew he was a Green War vet, and I knew his name was on the moon, but he fought in the French resistance, so I guess he's a World War II vet too. In 2017, my family was fortunate enough to travel to my mother's hometown, Brussels, Germany, and we had 5 Stolpersteins installed. Stolperstein means stumbling stone. And this is the artist. He's non-Jewish, and he started this project in 1996 in Berlin. You see, he lays these stones, or brass markers, in front of the homes of people who were deported, whether they were killed or not. So we had 5 installed. Max, Edith's father. Julia, Edith's mother. Edith, Heinz, Edith's brother, and Matilda Weil, my great-grandmother. This prayer book, that's her signature. It's from the 1880s and somehow survived the war. And we use this prayer book, that's my niece, to say a Jewish morning prayer during the ceremony. The town of Brussels, they were absolutely wonderful people in that town. They welcomed us with open arms and were extremely generous of heart and spent part of an evening and the next day with us. There was also an assembly at the local middle school. That's part of my family. Unfortunately, my mother couldn't make it. She wasn't feeling well enough. The ceremony consisted, was for 5 families, because it was 5 families who had relatives who were deported from Bruxelles, not just ours. And at one point we went to my great-grandfather's grave. This is Moses Loeb. He died way before World War II. I grew up on Long Island, as Dan said. I grew up in a loving but complicated home. My parents were extremely overprotective, understandably so. My first experience with anti-Semitism was in 1st grade, when my classmate called me a dirty Jew. In junior high school, a boy set firecrackers in the stairwell on the way home. When I was 16 and home alone, the mailbox affixed to my house was blown up. And eggs were thrown at our house on an occasional basis. At my current job many years ago, my former boss sat not too far away from me, and I overheard him saying to the customer, well, why don't you Jew him down? And then more recently, in the last few years, my husband Mark and I overheard a couple people who we know say the term Jewish lightning. Well, I didn't know what that was. Probably most of you don't know what that is. So I went home and I Googled it. Basically what it means is when somebody burns down their business for the insurance money. How it became an anti-Semitic trope, I have no idea. Oops. I mentioned before that my classmate called me a dirty Jew in 1st grade. Well, to make a long story short, her brother made a post on Facebook just several months ago, just before our high school reunion, Beth. And he was just sharing a lot of memories from junior high and high school that blew me away that I couldn't remember. And he was actually apologizing for being a bully. And I decided to make a comment and say, well, I don't have too many memories, but I do remember your sister calling me a dirty Jew. And he contacted his sister, and she wrote me this email. My adult self is not shocked to see this, given what was said and taught in my house. But I am no less ashamed, horrified, and saddened, especially when I see how this has stuck with you and hurt you so badly. If it's any comfort, I am not the same person and do not advocate hate against anyone and don't tolerate it in my life. Maybe it's some comfort in knowing that I have not continued to hurt others like I hurt you. Thank you for being open to my message. It's great to hear that it had a positive effect, which in some ways kind of changed my life. And I get to add it to the story I tell. My parents are 91 and 92 and live in Boynton Beach, Florida. My father is on an advisory board for the Jewish Family and Children's Services down there to help procure funds for survivors who need it. And he also volunteers for the Jewish War Veterans of America. And he also speaks at schools. My mom sings in old age homes. I'd like to introduce my family. So this is my mom. I think she's 6 or 7 here. And that's my dad you saw earlier when he got out of the resistance. Obviously here are my parents. That's me, my sister Julie, my niece Jennifer, my niece Amanda, and my son Nathan and Jeremy. My 3rd son is from my 2nd marriage. So my mom's last name, maiden name, is Loeb. And it means strong man or lion. My father's last name is Leuchter, which means candelabra. I'd like to think that the strength and many branches of my family that now exist give us all light and hope for the future. Thank you again for listening, and let's hope we get Mom and Dad on Skype, and please feel welcome to ask them any questions you'd like. Thank you. Christina, are you going to try and call? Where are you? There you are. Do you want me to do it? Oh, okay. Sure. Okay, here we go. Well, I think between
you know where it is, you have to go over. No, it's not over.
Change that volume for
With the Skype, then you get stuck and it looks like you're.
Oh, he's playing Dad. Oh, somebody called him.
Okay.
Hi, Dad. Can you see?
Hi.
Can you see anything?
See you.
So
they're gonna
You can
see through that camera.
You can see in front.
Hi.
Hi.
So we have about like 65, 70 people here.
How many?
About 65 or 70.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. So this is Edith and Kurt Leuchter. Hello. Brandon, is there any chance we can? Do you think maybe we can move it so that they can see?
Yeah, we should be able to.
Hang on a moment.
just to see the crowd.
Yeah, I think they would love that. They don't need to see me. They see me every day on Skype.
The young man.
The young man.
Here we are. Hey. Okay. Awesome. Let me get out of the way. So they might have a few questions for you.
Are you all from Pittsburgh?
Yes.
No.
Go Steelers. Some of us are.
So what I'm going to do, I think, is this working? No. Okay, well, People are gonna ask you questions, and if you can't hear, I'll repeat it, if that's
Now.
okay.
All right.
Oh, it's working now. There we go. Okay, so did anybody have a question for my parents? My friend Sam wants to ask you a question.
Okay. Hello. When did you start noticing things change in 1938?
I couldn't hear.
I couldn't hear it either.
Sam wants to know when you started noticing things change in your personal life in Germany and Austria.
I couldn't hear
You might want to speak right into the computer.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, Sam would like to know, in your own personal life in Germany or Austria, when you started noticing things were changing.
Oh, well, in Austria it was 1938, after Hitler marched in. And I happened to see him drive. I was about maybe 60 feet away from where he drove in his car, with his big salute. And then we knew already something was up, because he was guarded so badly. I had no idea. There were four rows of soldiers, SS, SR, the stormtroopers, the Gestapo. Everybody was guarding him. So it was already time that things got started getting bad. And then the actual bad part came on Crystal Night, which was November 10th. November 9 at night, November 10th.
Yeah,
when they started to burn the
Dad,
synagogues, and not only the synagogues, but they also smashed all the windows in the stores, Jewish stores. They smashed the windows, they took the people out, and they made them with toothbrushes, clean the floor, and then, it was horrible.
how about you, Mom?
You cannot imagine what they did.
How about you, Mommy?
But this was at the beginning.
Hey,
I guess she told you, Debbie told you.
Mommy,
my daughter, what
Mommy, what did you start noticing changing in Bruxelles?
After November 10th,
Also,
when they burned the synagogue. I saw them when they burned the synagogue. It was in the middle of the night. It was November 9th to the 10th.
Crystal Night.
Right. Did anybody call you names? Did anybody call you names?
Yes. In school they called us Freddy Joe, and we had to move from that school to a Jewish school because they didn't let us stay in the regular school. So we had to move into the ghetto. And it got worse and worse. Because on Crystal Night I was called back from school at 9:30 in the morning, 10 o'clock. And everything was burning. The synagogue was burning. They fired in, took the skulls out. And it was a horrible thing. And I walked home, I see my father was already arrested. He was lined up with 10 other men. He was lined up in the hallway, and they took him away. My mom wasn't home.
I talked about that earlier.
My mom wasn't home, and
Right.
came home from shopping, and I told her what happened. So then she didn't want to stay home because I was afraid. So what happened is we went to my grandmother's house, and on the way to my grandmother's house, two big SS came, stormtroopers, and they grabbed me by the hair, grabbed my mother by the hair, and threw us on the street, down on the street. And there was a boom.
Dad, I actually told that part of the story. So let's see if anybody has any other questions, okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's nice.
My friend Beth has a question.
Hi, it's very nice to meet you, and thank you for my wonderful friend Debbie. She's one of my closest friends. Debbie mentioned reference to an aunt and a cousin in the story. Could you tell us what happened?
It's gobbled up from there, you think?
Yeah, it's probably too far away. So that's my friend Beth, and she said thank you for her wonderful friend Debbie, and she's very pleased to meet you. And she said that during your story, you talked about Aunt Paula and a cousin, and she'd like to know what happened to them.
Oh, okay. Well, after the war, I found them by coincidence. I found them in Paris, and we got together, and then we split up again because they had different papers to come here, and we had different. I had a different. My uncle sent me my papers to get to the United States. It took about a year, but I didn't see it then until my cousin went to Israel in the army in Israel, and I went to Korea, and then when I came back from Korea, my cousin came to the United States from Israel.
With his family.
With his family.
Dad, the question is, do you know what happened to them after they got off the train in Toulouse?
No. We don't know what happened to them. My uncle, he was in camp, in concentration camp near Toulouse, France, and my father was in Marseille, and they haven't seen each other for I don't know how long, 2 years, maybe 3 years. And we haven't heard anything. We don't know what happened.
Okay,
We don't know what happened to them during the war. They
Thanks.
never talked about it.
Right. Thanks, Dad. And I actually
And my
asked...
cousin said, yes, after the war, he told me that he was in the army in Israel.
Thanks, Dad. I also wanted to mention that I contacted my father's first cousin daughter recently.
Somebody back there once.
That's good, Dad. Cut me right off. It's all good. Greg, why don't you tell me your question and I'll ask it.
Sure. I just want to know if your dad has, you probably can't hear me, but if you have any stories from your time in the French Resistance.
Yes.
Can't hear me.
We can't understand, it's breaking up.
So that's our friend Greg,
Yeah.
and he wants to know if you have any stories from when you were in the French Resistance. But before you answer, I want to tell you that I already said that you blew up the convoys and the rails. I already told them that part. Do you have any other stories from the French Resistance?
Well, I tell you, it wasn't easy. Let me tell you, the Germans were everywhere. We had to go in the woods every day somewhere else. And we ate because we held up the farmers, and we ate. They gave us some food. We always had to listen to the news. Our commander, he was listening to the news from the BBC, what's going on and what's happening. So we all know what they can expect. And the BBC and the Americans, we got the news what's happening. So when we had a convoy of armored columns, they bombed the armored columns, the British, or the American bombed the armored columns, and when they came out into the woods, we took care of them.
Yes.
Thanks,
But,
Dad.
there's a lot of stories. I don't want to go into every detail. It's not funny, believe me. Because our life is at stake every minute. We used to, when they came with convoys, not armored cars, but just trucks, we used to throw grenades at the last one. And they blew up. What can I tell you? It wasn't easy to do these kind of things.
Thanks,
But
Dad.
you have to defend yourself.
Right. Okay, let's see if anybody else has any other questions.
Somebody back there.
I just want to say, their life has been full of many.
I'm watching you.
Many I know their life has been full of many lows and many highs, and I wonder if they've had many opportunities to go back to the museum of art to kind of renew that.
Go ahead.
He says that he knows that your life has been full of many highs and many lows, but he wants to know if you ever had the opportunity to go back to the Museum of Modern Art where you met.
No, we didn't, but I just found out tonight from my other granddaughter, I found out that she just got an answer from the museum and they want to talk to us. Just happened just about an hour ago.
Okay, my friend Michelle wants to.
That's
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. But otherwise, I didn't Debbie told you people everything, our
Yes.
whole story.
I did.
I mean, there's other details, you can't say anything in an hour, I'm sure.
Well, personally, I thought I did a pretty good job, but anyway. Daddy, I've got, Mommy and Daddy, I've got another question.
What's that, Debbie?
I have another question from my friend Michelle, so hold on.
I'm sorry to do this turns out not to be no, but if it's yes, it's going to be amazing. If you could ask him how many Jews were in Vienna, what district he lived in, his book would see it, and whether he knew a Hans Ernst Ultmann, I would appreciate it.
So my friend Michelle in the audience, she's a new friend of mine, and I met her at an exhibit in Pittsburgh. It was a photography exhibit of Holocaust survivors, and it was sponsored by the University of Pittsburgh and the Holocaust Center. And we started talking, and she told me that her father was from Vienna. And she wants to know what bezirk you lived in, and she also... 13th.
If he was in 9.
Okay, her father was in the 9th bezirk, and did you know anybody by chance by the name of Hans Ultmann or...
Hans Ernst Ultmann.
Hans Ernst Ultmann.
No.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
I think they should renew their vows.
Okay, so this is great. So one young lady said you should renew your vows at the Museum of Modern Art.
But I tell you what, my kids are all coming on our 70th wedding anniversary, which is in August. They're all coming to see us. I'm having a party.
Everybody wanted to thank you for joining us via Skype. Everybody wanted to thank you for joining us via Skype.
Oh, that's the one make it that far.
Can you repeat that? What did you say, Dad?
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question?
Oh, wait. Don't hang up. We got another question. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
They are so
That's okay.
No.
what keeps them so healthy and sharp. Each other. They are so.
What keeps you so healthy and sharp?
But the bills that they have
I do know they eat a grapefruit every night.
That's it.
Okay.
Well,
Oh,
listen,
another
I'm retired. I was in retirement now for 27 years.
Good for you.
And I kept busy. The thing is to keep busy. And you retire. Do something. Don't sit around. I'm 26 years with police department, or the sheriff department in Florida.
Oh, I
I
love
just
that.
last week.
I think we have another question. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm holding.
He's a ham.
Or did you, the kids, bring it up?
Did you always talk freely about your experience in the Holocaust?
Do you talk what?
Did you always talk openly and freely about your Holocaust experience?
Only the last few years.
That's not true. You've told me since I was 4 years old.
I talked before, but in the beginning, when we first came to this country, we didn't talk much about it. I didn't even tell the kids. I mean, the kids from work, I wasn't talkative about it. But then I said to myself, you have to pass these experiences because we don't want this to happen again. It's a very bad thing to happen. People shouldn't hate each other.
And they should know what happened.
And they should know what happened. It was a horrible, horrible thing that happened everywhere. I mean, I can't even tell you how bad it was. We were on the bombardments, we were on the constant surveillance. You always have to look at your back if the secret police was watching you. And it's terrible. Look, we have the free country here, thank God. I hope it stays free. That's all I can tell you. I mean, I fought overseas, I fought in Korea. We helped them, so we helped South Korea. Look what they did. They got big and they got free. I mean, it's a good thing in one time, but on the other hand, it's bad to have other wars. Look at Afghanistan, they're stuck for 18 years there. I mean, it's bad news. We shouldn't let anything happen, let's put it that way. Everybody should be on alert what's going on around you. That's very important.
Thank
That's
you.
all I can tell you.
Mom, did you want to say anything?
Yes.
Mommy, did you want to say anything?
Mom's very quiet.
Yes.
She's a very quiet person.
Hey Debbie, I have a question for your mom.
Okay. My friend Beth has a question for you, Mommy, so hold on a second.
She said
What is it?
I would like to know, I'd like to hear
I know, I can't
her
believe what she was
thoughts
asking.
on what it meant to go back to Germany in 2017 to her hometown. Oh, she didn't go. And there's some pictures and
But she
notes.
went to cities.
Yeah.
My friend Beth wants to know what it was like when you went back to Bruxelles in the 1970s.
Did I went back?
No, Dad.
We went together?
No. But Daddy, the question's for Mommy. So, we want to know what it was like for you and how it felt to go back to Bruxelles in the 1970s when we went as a family.
We had some friends there and they were not Nazis and we spoke with them and we kept in touch. Well, now they're not here anymore, so. But we hear from their kids and she sends letters, notes, and so we are in touch like that. I have a friend from Bruxelles that I'm in touch with. She lives in South Carolina, and I do speak with her sometimes. The other one in Germany, I don't speak much with, but she does call once in a while.
I did want to mention, though, that my mom's first grade classmate attended the Stolperstein ceremony with her husband and daughter in 2017, and we got to meet them. She was not Jewish.
Wow.
Okay. Well?
There's somebody back there.
I was thinking about one.
I'm gonna raise the hands.
You know what, I got one more question.
Okay, great.
So I'm gonna ask Debbie, can you ask them, your mother spoke of some people that weren't Nazis and some people that were. I never heard, I just assumed that all the Germans, and I'm half German, went, followed Hitler and followed the German Reich. So was there a split or division between people that didn't support the Third Reich and not?
I don't know if they can answer
At
because
the
they're
time,
really young, but
of the war, they were all with him. Nobody resented. Nobody could resent. or that they'd be arrested and sent to concentration camp. But after the war, some of them from Edith's town, people were very nice after. We went back to put some stones there.
Stolperstein, they
It's
call
called Stolperstein. The one it's in front of the house that she lived there. And then he went with us. I can tell you more about it. And
So did Mark.
it mostly older people. I was about, at the time, 9, 10 years old when the war started. And some of the people that were in the Hitler years, young boys at 18, 19 years old were in it. And then the ones that grew up and got older than we were, these were the Nazis, most of them. Some younger people, you can talk to younger people now. I went back, I spoke to younger people, I have nothing against them. Why should I? It wasn't their fault. But the older people that were about 5, 10 years older than we are at the time, they were dang ho about it. They all followed. So that you see, some people follow us, they followed them because we promised them the world. But on the other hand, you have to make up your mind. You have to use your own head and decide what you're going to do. Are you going to follow them or are you going to not follow them? That's it.
Dankeschön.
So we have a couple of people from the younger generation. They're teenagers. And they want to know if you have any advice for them, for the next generation.
Yes, they are.
Did you stand up, kids? Did you stand up? Did you see them?
Yeah. I'll tell you what. You just listen, you read different papers, you look at different TV and hear some news. You make up your mind, your own mind in your head. Don't listen just to this guy or that guy. Just make up your own mind. You know what's right or what's wrong. And you decide. That's the way it's going to be. You have to listen.
Okay. Thanks, Mom and Dad.
Okay.
I love you.
Let's talk to you.
That's it?
I just want to remind everybody, because there were some terms that you may not be familiar with, if you'd like to take paper, then that's links.
Do you want me to look at some more?
Oh my God, that's a good idea. There's only 50 here, so you don't take it.
If some folks have cell phones with them, you could just take a picture too, so you have more to pass around.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah.